Marcus Webb sat in his car and stared at his phone. The rejection email was already there, sent before he even reached the parking garage. 6 months of applications, and this one had felt different. He had answered every technical question, cleanly walked them through architecture, diagrams, talked load balancing, and failover design without missing a beat. Then the HR form asked about availability. He told the truth. He was a single father. His daughter was 7. That was all it took. He was still holding the phone when the front doors of Horizon Technologies burst open, and 3 engineers ran out, faces stripped of color voices, cutting across each other in a way that had nothing to do with a normal Tuesday morning. That morning had started the same way the last 6 months had, with Marcus making breakfast before 7, packing Lily's lunch, and pretending the silence in the apartment did not cost anything. The startup he had spent 4 years building had folded in March. Not dramatically, not with a scandal or a lawsuit. It had simply run out of money the way a lot of things in Austin did when the funding dried up and the founders stopped returning calls. 12 years of back-end engineering database architecture systems that processed millions of transactions without blinking, and he had been reduced to refreshing his inbox every morning like it was the only thing keeping him upright. The rent on their 2-bedroom off South Lamar was due in 11 days. Lily's school tuition was pulling $340 a month out of an account that no longer had much left to pull from. The health insurance, her health insurance, specifically because Marcus had let his own lapse 2 months ago without telling anyone, was another $218. He moved around like a card trick every billing cycle. He had not told Lily any of this. She was 7. She did not need to know. What she did know, apparently, was that her father had a big interview that morning. She had been watching him iron his shirt the night before with the focused seriousness of someone witnessing something important. Before he dropped her off at school, she pressed a folded piece of paper into his jacket pocket without explanation. He opened it at a red light. It was a drawing 2 stick figures, one tall and one small, standing next to something that might have been a building or a rocket ship. It was hard to tell. Underneath, in the large, uneven letters of a child who had recently learned to write in cursive, "Good luck. Daddy, you're the best." He folded it back up and put it in his wallet. The interview with Horizon Technologies had been scheduled for 9 in the morning. Horizon was not a flashy company. They were 8 years old, 190 employees, mid-market SaaS infrastructure, the kind of company that did serious work without being on the cover of anything. The job posting was for a senior back-end engineer with deep experience in distributed systems and database architecture. Marcus had read the job description 4 times and felt for the first time in months like it had been written specifically for someone with his background. Tom Briggs, the director of engineering, met him in the lobby and walked him up to a glass-walled conference room on the 4th floor. Tom was methodical and direct, which Marcus respected. The technical questions were real questions, not trivia, not trick problems, but the kind of scenario-based challenges that assumed the person across the table already knew what they were doing. Marcus walked him through a database migration strategy under live traffic. He diagrammed a failover architecture on the whiteboard, using a marker that kept running dry. He explained clearly, and without padding, how he had rebuilt the transaction processing layer at his last company from the ground up after a cascading failure nearly took the whole system down. Tom was nodding by the end of it, not politely, genuinely. Marcus had done this long enough to know the difference. Then the HR portion of the interview began. The form was standard employment history references, the usual section about work authorization. Then a question near the bottom phrased in careful corporate language. Do you have any personal circumstances that may affect your availability or schedule? Marcus looked at the question for a moment. He had rehearsed 2 versions of an answer. One was vague and manageable. The other was true. He told the truth. I'm a single dad, he said. My daughter is 7. I'm the only parent, but I want to be straightforward about that. Up front, I have never missed a deadline in 12 years. Not one. The energy in the room shifted in a way that was subtle enough to ignore if you wanted to, and impossible to ignore if you did not. Tom set down his pen. The follow-up questions that came after were no longer about systems or architecture. They were about availability, on-call rotations, late deployment windows, the kind of questions that asked in a different tone would have been reasonable, but asked in this tone with this timing meant something else entirely. Marcus answered each one, calmly, specifically. He explained his childcare arrangement, his backup plan, the fact that he had managed on-call responsibilities at 2 previous companies without incident. Tom listened with the expression of someone who had already made up his mind and was waiting for the conversation to conclude. The interview ended with a handshake and a standard line about being in touch within a few days. Marcus was in the elevator when his phone buzzed. He looked down. It was an email from Horizon's HR department. The timestamp was 4 minutes after the interview had ended. We've decided to move forward with other candidates who better fit our current team needs. We appreciate your time and wish you the best in your search. He stood in the elevator and read it once. He did not read it again. When the doors opened at the lobby, he walked to his car, sat down, and looked at the steering wheel for a moment that stretched longer than he intended. He opened his wallet. The folded piece of paper was still there. He looked at it without unfolding it, then put it back. You didn't lose because you weren't good enough. That was what he told himself. He believed it in the part of his brain that was still functioning rationally. The other part, the part that had been doing this for 6 months, that had watched the account balance drop below 4 figures, that picked Lily up from school every afternoon and smiled like everything was fine, that part was considerably less convinced. He was still sitting there when he noticed the man outside, one of Horizon's engineers, young, probably mid-20s, wearing the lanyard they gave to full-time employees, was standing on the sidewalk about 30 feet from Marcus's car, with a laptop open and balanced on his forearm, like he was trying to work standing up. His face had the specific blankness of someone who had just received very bad news and had not yet decided how to react to it. A second engineer came through the front doors a moment later, moving fast, and said something that Marcus could not hear through the glass. The first engineer looked up from the laptop and said something back. Marcus cracked his window. Demo database just crashed. Everything's down. The investors are literally upstairs right now. Marcus did not move. He looked at the laptop screen from where he was sitting. The error message was visible from 30 feet, a specific combination of timeout warnings and constraint violation codes that he recognized the way you recognize a voice on the phone before the person says their name. He had seen that exact pattern before, not something similar. That exact pattern. PostgreSQL under high concurrent write load a cascading foreign key constraint failure triggered by a migration script that had been sitting in the system like a quiet fault line waiting for the right amount of pressure. He had fixed that bug in the spring of 2019. It had taken him 4 hours and cost his previous company $200,000 before he got there. He knew exactly what it was. He knew exactly where to look. He knew with the specific certainty of someone who had already made this mistake once and would not make it again what the fix required. He sat with that knowledge for a moment. Outside, a third engineer had joined the other 2. Someone was on the phone. Someone else was walking in tight circles on the sidewalk, the way people do when they cannot stand still and have nowhere to go. Marcus could start the car. He could drive to Lily's school pickup in 5 hours and say nothing about today, except that it had not worked out. Nobody inside that building knew he was still sitting in this parking garage. Nobody would know if he left. He picked up the rejection email on his phone and read it one more time. Then he got out of the car. The lobby of Horizon Technologies was the kind of space that had been designed to project confidence, high ceilings, exposed concrete. A reception desk made of pale wood that probably had a name. Right now, it looked like a fire drill that nobody had planned for. 2 employees were standing near the elevator bank talking over each other. Someone at the far end of the room was on a call, voice low, and controlled in the way that meant the situation was the opposite. The receptionist, a young woman with a headset half pulled off one ear, looked up when Marcus walked through the front doors and clearly did not know what category to put him in. "I was here for an interview this morning," Marcus said. "I think I can help with whatever is happening to your system right now. I need to speak to someone in engineering." The receptionist looked at him the way people look at someone who has said something that does not quite fit the available options. She reached for her phone. Marcus waited. 30 seconds later, a security guard appeared from a side corridor and positioned himself between Marcus and the elevator with the practiced neutrality of someone doing a job rather than making a judgment. Then, Tom Briggs came around the corner. Tom stopped when he saw Marcus. The expression on his face moved through surprise and landed on something closer to irritation. "Mr. Webb," he said, "you need to leave. We're dealing with an internal situation right now." "I know what the situation is," Marcus said. He kept his voice even. "I saw the error codes on your engineer's laptop outside. It's a cascading foreign key constraint failure in your demo database. Your team is looking at the wrong layer. I've fixed this exact issue before, same database engine, same failure pattern. Give me access and 5 minutes. Tom looked at him for a moment, then shook his head. "That's not something we can do. I'm going to have to ask you to, how long has the system been down?" Tom did not answer, which was itself an answer. Marcus glanced toward the elevator. Somewhere on the 12th floor, a room full of investors from Vantage Capital was sitting with coffee going cold and a presentation that could not load. The elevator opened. Rachel Holt walked out. Marcus had not met her during the interview process. She had not been part of it. But he knew who she was. Horizon Technologies was her company. She had co-founded it 8 years ago out of a converted garage in East Austin and had grown it to nearly 200 employees without taking a single acquisition offer. Her name came up in tech circles the way certain names did not, because she sought attention, but because the work spoke loudly enough that attention followed anyway. She was 44, dressed in a dark blazer over a plain shirt, and she was moving through the lobby with the focus of someone who had run out of patience for everything that was not a solution. She had a phone pressed to her ear and was mid-sentence when she saw Marcus standing at the reception desk with her head of engineering and a security guard. She finished her sentence, "I'll call you back in 2 minutes," and lowered the phone. Her eyes moved from Tom to Marcus and back to Tom. "Who is this?" "The candidate from this morning's 9 o'clock, Tom said. "He came back in. I know what your system is doing," Marcus said, addressing Rachel directly. "It's not a query problem, and it's not an index problem. Your demo database is failing on a foreign key constraint that was misconfigured in a migration script, my guess is 3 to 4 weeks ago, during a schema update. It only activates under high concurrent write load, which means today is probably the first time you've run the full demo dataset at scale. Your engineers are looking at the surface errors. The root cause is 1 level deeper." Rachel looked at him, the way an engineer looks at a problem statement, assessing whether the logic holds. "You saw this from the parking garage," she said. "I recognized the error pattern on one of your engineers' screens. I dealt with the same failure in 2019 at my previous company. Took 4 hours to fix it the first time. I know exactly what the fix is now." Rachel glanced toward the stairwell door, where the sound of urgent footsteps suggested at least 2 more people were moving between floors, trying to find a solution that had not appeared yet. The investors upstairs had been waiting for over 40 minutes. She had spent 8 months preparing for this meeting with Vantage Capital, $40 million in Series C funding that would determine whether Horizon spent the next 3 years expanding or contracting. "Tom," she said, "get him access." Tom Briggs straightened. "Rachel, he's not an employee. He's not under NDA. We don't have any. If he makes this worse, we have no legal framework to. Then we'll get a framework." Rachel turned to Marcus. "I need you to sign a liability waiver. If you access our systems, and the situation deteriorates, you carry legal responsibility for any additional damage. Those are the terms. Fine, Marcus said. Tom looked at both of them, as if waiting for someone to reconsider. Nobody did. Rachel told the receptionist to print a standard contractor waiver. Marcus signed it at the desk without reading every line he read, enough to understand what he was agreeing to, and then he signed. Rachel handed the paper back to the receptionist and gestured toward the elevator without further discussion. 5 minutes, she said. Not 6. The server room was on the 3rd floor, through a keycard door that Tom opened with the expression of a man doing something under protest. The room was cold and loud, with the white noise of cooling systems running at full draw. 3 consultants from 2 different IT firms had set up at a folding table along one wall, laptops, open all of them, working the problem from different angles that had not yet converged on anything useful. They looked up when Marcus walked in, registered that he was not someone they recognized, and returned to their screens with the dismissiveness of people who considered themselves the only adults in the room. Marcus sat down at the workstation Tom unlocked for him. He did not introduce himself to the consultants. He pulled up the error logs and started reading from the beginning. The logs were dense and long, the kind of output that looked overwhelming if you were searching for the problem in the wrong place. Marcus was not searching. He was confirming. The first 2 minutes were not troubleshooting, they were verification. He moved through the log entries with the methodical speed of someone who had already formed a hypothesis and was simply checking whether the evidence supported it. It did. One of the consultants, a man in his mid-30s with the confident posture of someone accustomed to being the most technically credentialed person in a given room, leaned over to look at Marcus's screen. "We already went through the logs," he said. "The indexes are clean. It's not a read problem." "I know," Marcus said. He kept reading. "So, what are you looking for?" Marcus pointed at a specific cluster of entries, roughly 40 seconds into the failure cascade. "This is where it starts." "Not here," he scrolled up. "Where everybody thinks it starts. Look at the timestamp delta between these 2 write operations. There's a constraint violation firing between tables that shouldn't be in conflict unless the foreign key relationship was set up with the wrong deferral setting." The consultant looked at the screen. His expression did not change in a way that suggested he was fully following, but it changed enough to suggest he was no longer fully dismissing it either. He said nothing else and stepped back. Tom Briggs was standing near the door with his arms crossed. Rachel had positioned herself against the wall to the left of the workstation, not hovering, not pacing, just present. Watching. Marcus pulled up the migration files. It took him 90 seconds to find it a constraint defined as not deferrable, in a migration that had been pushed to production roughly 3 weeks earlier. Whoever wrote the script had set it correctly in the development environment and incorrectly in production, probably a copy-paste error on a line that looked identical to the one above it. Under normal traffic, the system processed writes sequentially enough that the conflict never surfaced. Under the full concurrent load of a live demo with investor-grade data volume, every write was fighting every other write, and the constraint was rejecting them in a cascade that locked the entire database. It was in the end a single wrong word in a configuration file, the kind of mistake that could be made by a senior engineer on a Tuesday afternoon when they were tired and moving fast and had 20 other things open on their screen. Marcus began composing the fix. He was not going to drop the constraint that was the obvious move and the wrong one, the kind of thing that fixed the symptom and destroyed the data integrity in the process. He was going to alter it to deferrable initially deferred, which would allow the database to validate the constraint at the end of each transaction rather than at each individual write. The data would stay clean. The locks would release. The system would breathe again. He typed the command out, fully checked it twice, and moved the cursor to execute. His hands were steady. That surprised him slightly. He had expected the pressure of the room to register in his body, more than it did the cold air. The consultants. Tom's posture, the $40 million sitting 12 floors above his head in a conference room. But the steadiness was there, the same way it had always been there, when the problem in front of him was one he understood. He reached for his wallet. He had not planned to do it. His hand moved before his mind issued the instruction. He opened the wallet and took out the folded piece of paper, Lily's drawing her uneven, cursive, "Good luck, Daddy." "You're the best." He set it on the desk next to the keyboard and looked at it for 2 seconds. He had made this mistake once before. In the spring of 2019 at his previous company, he had executed a nearly identical command 4 hours into a production failure, and he had done it one step too early before verifying that all active transactions had cleared the write queue. The result had been a full system crash that took another 4 hours to restore and had cost the company $200,000. He had been the one who fixed it eventually, but he had also been the one who had made it worse first in front of people who were depending on him. This time, the write queue was clear. He had checked it. He had checked it twice. The active transaction count was 0. The conditions were right. He knew they were right, not because he was hoping, but because the logs told him so in plain text. This time I'm not wrong. I know I'm not wrong. He pressed execute. The screen did not change. 10 seconds passed. The room was quiet in the particular way that rooms get quiet when a group of people are all watching the same thing, and none of them are breathing quite normally. Marcus kept his eyes on the terminal output. The command had registered. The process was running. He could see it in the process list a single database operation active working through the constraint alteration across every affected table in the schema. 20 seconds. Tom Briggs exhaled through his nose, not loudly, but audibly. The consultant who had challenged Marcus earlier was standing with his arms folded, watching the screen with an expression that had shifted from dismissive to genuinely uncertain. 30 seconds. A second terminal window opened automatically and displayed a single-line connection timeout. The consultant shook his head and began closing his laptop. "We need to escalate this differently," he said to no one in particular, and stood up. Tom turned toward Rachel. "We should go upstairs and tell the Vantage team we need to reschedule. Every minute we leave them sitting there." "It's still running," Marcus said. His voice was level. He had checked the process list again. The operation was active. Not stalled, not dead. The timeout was a surface event, a monitoring connection that had dropped because the database was under load, not a sign that the fix had failed. "The process is still active. Give it 30 more seconds." Tom looked at Rachel. Rachel looked at the screen. She did not move toward the door. The consultant who had been closing his laptop stopped closing it. Nobody spoke. The cooling fans ran. Somewhere in the building a phone rang twice and went to voicemail. Marcus kept his eyes on the process monitor, watching the single active operation move through its work table by table, constraint by constraint, correcting the one wrong word that had locked everything down. He did not look at Lily's drawing again. He did not need to. It was already inside the decision he had made 30 seconds ago the moment he pressed execute without flinching. He waited. The first screen came back at 28 seconds. Did not happen all at once. The dashboard did not flood back in a single dramatic moment. It came back the way power returns, after an outage, one panel, then another, each one loading its data in sequence, as the database released its locks and began processing the backlog of writes that had been stacking up throughout the outage. The terminal window that had shown the timeout error refreshed and displayed a clean connection status. The process monitor showed the operation completing its final table, then closing. The consultant who had been standing with his arms folded uncrossed them. The younger engineer near the door, a Horizon employee who had been quiet the entire time, let out a breath that was almost a laugh, then caught himself and went still. Tom Briggs was looking at the screens with the expression of a man recalculating something he thought he had already finished calculating. Rachel Holt pushed off from the wall and walked to the workstation. She looked at the dashboard, fully loaded, all systems, green, the demo dataset intact and queryable, and then she looked at Marcus. When she spoke, her voice was the same controlled register it had been throughout, but something in it had shifted slightly, the way a room shifts when a window opens. "Run a validation query," she said. "I want to confirm the data integrity before we go upstairs." Marcus was already typing it. The query ran in 4 seconds and returned clean. No corrupt records, no orphaned foreign keys, no data loss. The constraint alteration had worked exactly as intended. He turned the screen toward Rachel so she could read the output herself. She read it. Then she straightened up and looked at Tom. "Tell the Vantage team we'll be ready in 10 minutes. Tell them we had a technical calibration and it's resolved." Tom opened his mouth, then closed it, then left the room. Rachel looked at the consultants. "Thank you for your time today. We'll handle the rest internally." It was a dismissal delivered with enough courtesy that there was nothing to object to, and the consultants gathered their laptops and left without further conversation. The room was suddenly much quieter, just the cooling fans and Rachel and Marcus still sitting at the workstation with Lily's drawing on the desk beside the keyboard. Rachel pulled a chair from the folding table and sat down across from him. For the first time since she had walked out of the elevator, she did not look like someone managing a crisis. She looked like someone who had a few minutes and intended to use them honestly. "What you just did," she said, "was the best diagnostic work I've seen in this building in 3 years, and I used to be an engineer. I know what I'm looking at." Marcus folded the piece of paper and put it back in his wallet. "The fix wasn't complicated," he said. "The hard part was knowing where to look." "That's exactly what I mean." Rachel leaned forward slightly, forearms on her knees. "Tom made a bad call this morning. And I want to be clear, I'm not talking about the technical decision. I'm talking about the interview." Marcus did not respond to that immediately. He had spent most of the morning managing the specific discipline of not letting the rejection mean more than he could afford it to mean. Having it named directly by the person who ran the company in a cold server room 40 minutes after he had walked back in through the front door, it landed differently than he expected. Not with relief exactly, with something more like the particular tiredness that comes after a long time spent holding something tightly. Rachel continued. "Being a single parent doesn't make someone less committed. It makes them better at working under pressure and better at not wasting time. Those are not small things in an engineering organization." She said it plainly without the tone of someone delivering a prepared statement. It sounded like something she had thought about before, from a position that was personal rather than procedural. She went on. "When I was 26, I applied for a summer engineering internship at a firm in Dallas. I had my son with me at the interview. He was 2. The sitter fell through. I had no other option. They told me very politely that they weren't sure I had the right priorities for the role." She looked at Marcus directly. "I have not forgotten that conversation. And I have never run a company that way." Marcus looked at her. He understood that she was not offering him sympathy. She was offering him context, the specific context of someone who had been on the other side of the same kind of judgment and had made a decision years ago about what kind of organization she would build as a result. "I'd like to offer you a position," Rachel said. "Not the one you interviewed for this morning. Senior infrastructure engineer, it's the tier above it. The base salary is 30% higher than the posting you applied to, with a performance bonus structured on a 6-month cycle." She named the number. Marcus kept his expression even, but the number was enough to cover the rent and Lily's tuition and the health insurance, and still leave something at the end of the month that did not need to be moved around like a card trick. "And the flexible schedule isn't a verbal agreement," Rachel added. "It goes into the contract, specific language about core hours and remote work provisions. You'll have it in writing before you sign anything." Marcus was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, absorbing. There was a difference. "Why the senior role?" he asked. You don't know my full work history. You've seen me fix one problem. I've seen you walk back into a building that rejected you 2 hours ago because you recognized a problem you could solve, and you decided that mattered more than how you felt about the rejection, Rachel said. I've seen you sit down in a room full of people who were skeptical of you, stay calm, diagnose correctly, and execute without making it worse. In 8 years of running this company, I have interviewed a lot of engineers. She stood up. I know what I'm looking at. She held out her hand. Marcus stood and shook it. HR will send the formal offer by end of day, she said. Take whatever time you need to review it. She glanced down at the folded drawing still visible at the edge of the desk before Marcus had returned it fully to his wallet. Something in her expression settled the way a thought settles when it confirms something you already believed. She walked out without another word, and she did not need to say one. Marcus picked up the formal offer on his phone at 4:17 that afternoon, sitting in the pickup line outside Lily's school. He read through it twice: the salary, the bonus structure, the specific contract language about flexible hours and remote work provisions, the start date of 2 weeks from Monday. Everything Rachel had said in the server room was in the document in writing exactly as stated. He was still looking at his phone when the passenger door opened, and Lily climbed in, dropping her backpack on the floor and pulling the door shut behind her with both hands, the way she always did, using more effort than the task required because she was 7, and everything was done with full commitment. She clicked her seatbelt, looked at him, and asked the question before he had said a single word. Did you get the job, Daddy? Marcus set his phone down. He reached over and checked that her seatbelt was properly latched the way he always did, even though she was old enough to do it correctly herself. Yeah, he said. I got it? Lily made a sound that was somewhere between a cheer and a gasp and hit the dashboard lightly with both palms, which was her version of celebration. Then she settled back into her seat and looked out the windshield with the thoughtful expression she sometimes got after big pieces of news, the expression that meant a question was forming. Are you happy? She asked. Marcus pulled forward in the line. The afternoon was bright and flat, and Austin warm, the kind of October afternoon that still felt like summer. He thought about the morning, the rejection email at the bottom of the elevator, the parking garage, the error codes on a stranger's screen, the cold server room, and the 30 seconds of silence, and the cursor blinking above the execute command while the whole building waited. He thought about Rachel's hand extended across the space between them, and the number she had named, and the specific language about a flexible schedule that would be printed in a contract and signed by both parties and kept on file. He thought about Lily's drawing folded in his wallet, which had been there all day. Yeah, baby, he said. I really am. He did not mean the job exactly, or not only the job. He meant the version of the morning where he had gotten out of the car anyway, where he had walked back through the front doors of a building that had told him he was not enough because he knew something they needed, and he decided that knowing it was sufficient reason to act on it. Nobody had given him permission to go back in. Nobody had told him the outcome would be what it was. He had gone because the problem was real, and he was the person who could fix it, and that had turned out to be enough. It had always been enough. He had just needed a Tuesday in October in a cold server room in Austin, Texas, to prove it to himself in a way that could not be taken back. The pickup line moved forward. Lily turned on the radio without asking, found a song she liked, and began singing along quietly and slightly off-key. Marcus led her. He pulled out of the school lot and drove them home,